All right, so if you follow my channel, you're probably already aware of these ongoing discussions that we've been having about the buildup of a new Cold War with China. We can see it in all different facets of American life right now. We can see it in the rhetoric that our politicians are choosing to deploy that is very aggressively militaristic and confrontational towards China, viewing the relationship as a one of pure competition and nothing of to speak of cooperation in that way. We can also see it in the literal physical military buildup of our weapons capabilities in the Pacific and weapons that are designed specifically to serve the purposes of a potential buildup or conflict with China. So we can see it across the board, and I'm glad that some politicians are recognizing this. Obviously, it shouldn't be too surprising that it's Bernie Sanders leading the charge on this, but he actually wrote an article here in Foreign Affairs that I thought was really interesting and good, because he's basically pointing out the obvious, that the United States, as the dominant global empire that we are, the dominant global economic system, you have China that is a rising economic system and the power that they are able to wield. And so, of course, with a violent imperialist nation like the United States, our initial gut reaction is going to be a repeat of what we did with the Soviet Union in the Cold War initially. And this seems like this is the direction that we have been heading. And so Bernie Sanders is warning against fomenting this sort of militaristic buildup with China and instead trying to work in a more cooperative way. And so here's what he had to say. I'm just going to point out some of the highlights here. So Washington's dangerous new consensus on China. Don't start another Cold War. So he basically begins this initial part by discussing how China became the global economic power that they are today. And in large part, that is because of trade deals like PNTR, Permanent Normal Trade Relations with China, that was passed in the early 2000s. I think it was actually 2000. And basically, he just discussed what this did to American manufacturing, shipped jobs overseas, allowed multinational U.S. corporations to go exploit cheap labor in China at the expense of good-paying union jobs in American manufacturing. And this is a bad thing, right? This is part of the reason why somebody like Donald Trump got elected in 2016, is because he ran nominally against a lot of these trade deals, even though when he eventually took office, obviously he didn't reverse those trade deals or do anything better, but he did run a campaign against a lot of these trade deals that did gut the Midwest and a lot of American manufacturing. So he discusses how we got into this situation and how all of these politicians at the time that were trying to sell PNTR as if it was going to liberalize China and as if it was going to serve the interests of the American public, and pointing out that they were wrong. And then basically he continues on here saying that they are wrong again in their approach that they're taking now. So he says, 20 years ago, the American economic and political establishment was wrong about China. Today, the consensus view has changed, but it is once again wrong. Now, instead of extolling the virtues of free trade and openness towards China, the establishment beats the drum for a new Cold War, casting China as an existential threat to the United States. We are already hearing politicians and representatives of the military-industrial complex using this as the latest pretext for larger and larger defense budgets. So obviously we've seen this. Joe Biden, this has been a pretty steady trend over the last couple of decades regardless. We had this with the war on terror, with just significantly escalating military budgets no matter who the president is. This is a long trajectory that has been heading in the upward direction. I'm sure most of you guys that watch my videos already know all this crazy statistics, how the United States spends more on defense spending, even though it's war spending. We spend more than the next, however many countries combined. I think it's the next 10 countries combined, most of which are our allies. We have, 800 military bases around the world when China only has a handful. So the comparisons between our two militaries and the constant, consistent military buildup on the side of the United States is a trend that we have been seeing consistently. And then he continues by describing what he thinks would be a better way forward than this militaristic confrontational approach. And he says, the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden has rightly recognized the rise of authoritarianism as a major threat to democracy. The primary conflict between democracy and authoritarianism, however, is taking place not between countries but within them, including the United States. And if the democracy is going to win out, it will do so not on a traditional battlefield, but by demonstrating that democracy can actually deliver a better quality of life for people than authoritarianism can. That is why we must revitalize the American democracy, restoring people's faith in government by addressing the long neglected needs of working families. We must create millions of good-paying jobs, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure and combating climate change. We must address the crises that we face in healthcare, housing, education, criminal justice, immigration, and many other areas. We must do this not only because it will make us more competitive with China or any other country, but because it will serve the needs of the American people. So listen, I couldn't have said it better myself there at the end with that little synopsis that he gave. This shouldn't be about everything that we're doing, whether it's, this next infrastructure bill that Joe Biden is trying to pass. And I made a video that was the other week where we were basically just discussing the rhetoric that our politicians choose to deploy in legislation. And I found it interesting that even on pieces of legislation that are specifically geared towards investing in American manufacturing, they still portray it and name the bills and discuss the bills in a way of, oh, well, we're only doing this because we have to combat the rise of China, instead of viewing it as, well, let's just invest in the American people because that's our job, is to invest in the American people, rebuild our infrastructure, tackle climate change, and do these things because they are good for the American people, and that's what your job is as an elected representative. So that's the attitude that we should be having. We should be trying to push for more of a cooperative attitude towards China, not a confrontational one with China, because believe it or not, war with China would not only not be easy, it would probably not be winnable, but it would, lead to infinite chaos and destruction that we literally could not even imagine. I mean, a war with China needs to be avoided at all costs, okay? It could very well be literally the end of the world as we know it right now if we were to try to go to war with another massive global a superpower like that with nuclear weapons, a massive army. It would not go well, to say the least, but I think that's pretty obvious. So if war can be avoided, it should be avoided, and in order for war to be avoided, then we need to start addressing some of the issues that we have here domestically and focusing on doing what is right for the American people instead of trying to fight wars on behalf of multinational corporations and their interests. So this is what we got to do. I think Bernie Sanders is right. We got to focus on the problems within our own country and make sure that we strengthen our own systems and institutions to be able to allow for people to actually build stable lives here, and worry about a lot of the shit that we have going on in our own country instead of trying to just push for a militaristic buildup and confrontation with China.